They say betrayal hurts worst when it comes from your own blood. I never truly understood that until the day I stood in court, staring down my own family across the aisle. My name is Dr. Celine Hart. I'm 45 years old, a neurosurgeon based in Boston. I've spent more than 2 decades saving lives, operating under the crushing weight of high-risk procedures and split-second decisions. But nothing prepared me for what I faced that morning. My family, smiling like strangers, ready to cut me down in front of the world. The courtroom was cold in that way only government buildings seem to master. Clean walls, beige tones, and the echo of footsteps that always seemed too loud. I sat beside my attorney in the front row, my back straight, my hands clasped. My brother Adrian sat across from me, flanked by his wife Clara and their high-priced legal team. My parents, yes, my own parents, were seated just behind them, looking far too comfortable in the witness section. Adrian was the first to speak. His voice trembled just slightly, but the rehearsed sincerity covered it well. "My sister Celine is unwell," he said, turning to face the judge. "She's not the person she used to be. She's become cold, erratic. She's alienated herself from the family. We're only here because we're worried about her, about the family legacy." Clara nodded sympathetically, resting a hand on Adrian's knee like they were grieving something tragic. She leaned forward, voice soft and full of practiced concern. "We've tried to help. We begged her to slow down, to come home more, but she's obsessed with work and she hasn't been making rational decisions." Then came the kicker. "We believe she is mentally unfit to manage the estate." I sat still, breathing through my nose, watching my life get reframed as a pathology. The judge turned to my parents. My mother stood, her face unreadable. "Celine has always been ambitious, and while we admire her success, we do worry. She hasn't come home for the holidays in 3 years. When my husband had his heart scare, she didn't visit. We had to beg her just to call." She blinked, then looked straight at me. "That's not family." My father didn't even look at me when he spoke. "This isn't personal. It's about protecting the future of our estate. If she's not willing to be present, then she shouldn't be in charge." I was quiet through all of it. No interruptions, no rebuttals. I let them paint the picture. The brilliant surgeon who had become too cold, too distant, too selfish to be trusted. And then, when they were done, when the courtroom had leaned fully into the silence left behind, I stood. I walked calmly to the witness box, requested permission to present a single piece of evidence, and handed the bailiff a plain folder. Inside was one document. Just one, a forensic financial report. The kind of thing that doesn't need dramatics. Clara's consultancy firm was listed on the cover page. What followed wasn't loud, it wasn't angry. It was still. The judge read, then blinked. The courtroom clerk looked up sharply. Adrian paled. My parents leaned forward, trying to understand. That one document didn't just speak, it screamed. And for the first time that morning, I allowed myself a small smile. Just a flicker. Because that was the moment the narrative began to shift. It started with a letter, a plain white envelope in my mailbox, tucked between a New England medical journal and a grocery coupon flyer. It was the kind of thing I almost tossed without opening, until I saw the sender, Boston Physicians Relief Fund. I slid it open, standing at the kitchen counter, half-focused, sipping cold coffee from the morning before. Inside was a printed notice congratulating me for being accepted into a financial hardship initiative for overworked physicians. My brows pinched. "Dear Dr. Celine Hart, we are pleased to confirm your enrollment in the Physician Debt and Relief Adjustment Program, PDRAP, effective immediately. Based on your submitted financial disclosures." I stopped reading. I hadn't submitted anything. I hadn't even heard of this program. I set the letter down and reread the opening line, more carefully this time. Enrolled, approved, based on documents I never sent. And there, at the bottom, was my full legal name, my Massachusetts license number, and a list of surgeries. Surgeries I had performed with patient IDs I recognized but had never disclosed outside the hospital system. My stomach dropped. That night, I sat at my desk and called the only person I could trust with questions like this. Natalie Chow, a former classmate who now worked in hospital finance at Brigham and Women's. "Natalie," I said as soon as she picked up, "off the record. I got a letter about some financial relief program I didn't apply for, and it had access to patient logs. My logs." "Jesus," she said. "That's not right. Hold on." She clacked away at her keyboard. I could hear her breathing shift as she read. Then slowly, Celine, this doesn't look good. What do you mean? According to our internal notes, someone used your credentials to apply for a data subsidy. They attached forms listing a third-party medical consultancy as the processing entity. Some company called Mindvest Holdings. I felt the air squeeze out of my lungs. That name means something to you? Natalie asked. Yeah, I said. It's my brother's side business. She didn't speak for a second. There's more, she finally said. Your old family home? The property transfer log says it was signed over to the same company 2 weeks ago. Full transfer. But the deed used to be in your name. What? Celine, your name isn't on the property anymore. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning slightly. I knew Adrian had access to the property records because he'd handled the taxes a few years ago after our parents said it was easier to let him manage the paperwork. But I never thought I didn't sleep that night. I pulled out the family trust binder and sifted through pages I hadn't touched in years. There it was, 2 versions of the transfer form, one with my signature, one without. I looked closer. The signature wasn't mine, it looked like mine, but it wasn't. The next morning, I showed up at Adrian's condo. Clara answered the door in yoga pants and full makeup, like she was prepping for a lifestyle shoot. Oh, Celine, she said, too cheerful. We weren't expecting you. No, I said, stepping past her. I didn't expect to find out my house was sold to your shell company either. Adrian walked in, holding a protein shake and a smile I wanted to knock clean off his face. It's just consolidation, he said, like that explained everything. You don't even use the place. We're keeping everything in the family. It's cleaner this way. I didn't sign anything. You don't need it, Clara chimed in, shrugging. You're busy saving lives and all that. Let us take the pressure off. Pressure. That was their word for it. I looked between them and realized something I couldn't yet say aloud. This wasn't miscommunication. It was theft. And it was personal. The lawsuit arrived by courier. A thick envelope, cream-colored, hand-delivered to my office with a receipt slip and a polite nod from the young man in a company polo. I signed my name without thinking. That was the last normal thing I did for weeks. Inside the envelope was a copy of the official filing, Hart v. Hart. My own parents listed as plaintiffs. My brother Adrian and Clara were co-filers, and me, I was the defendant. The claim, undue influence and asset manipulation. They accused me, Dr. Celine Hart, board-certified neurosurgeon, of coercing my elderly parents into signing over their estate and financial rights while they were in a vulnerable mental and emotional state. Adrian's team had even attached a physician statement claiming early signs of cognitive decline in my father, despite me knowing full well that he still beat his chess app at level 10. I stood in my office, holding the documents with trembling hands, my reflection dim in the glass behind my desk. My heart was pounding in a way it never did in the OR. By the end of that week, the media had picked up the story. It started with one blog post on a shady legal gossip site. Then it snowballed. Celebrated neurosurgeon sued by own family over financial exploitation. That was the headline that made it to the Boston Herald. Pictures of me from medical panels, awkwardly lit and out of context, were suddenly everywhere. One showed me mid-sentence, blinking, mouth slightly open. Another caught me walking through a hospital corridor with my coat trailing behind me like I was fleeing the scene of a crime. They said I was reclusive, cold, that I hadn't taken a real vacation in 7 years. The public was all too eager to eat up the idea of the burned-out surgeon turned manipulative villain. It didn't help that I stayed silent. My phone buzzed constantly, requests for comment, journalists pretending to be concerned, distant cousins asking if the rumors were true. A reporter even camped outside the ER parking garage for a few days, hoping to catch me in scrubs and shame. Eventually, the hospital placed me on administrative leave. Pending internal review, they said, avoiding eye contact. Colleagues who used to stop by my office for advice suddenly walked past me in the halls without a nod. The same nurses who used to leave thank you notes on my locker now looked uncomfortable if they found themselves alone with me in the elevator. But I didn't defend myself. Not yet. Instead, I took that time to start digging. Every night, I pored over digital bank statements and real estate filings. I cross-referenced tax records, consultancy payments, and medical licensing databases. Somewhere between the nausea and rage, I started seeing patterns, payments to a company registered in Delaware, shell accounts linked to overseas banks, and fake treatment claims filed under names I recognized. I traced a trail of fraudulent grants, all linked back to one company, Mindvest Holdings, Adrian's company. the side business he had once described as just a little consulting thing. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had built a lie big enough to bury me in. And now the whole world was watching. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. By now, I had turned my guest bedroom into a makeshift war room. The walls were covered in printouts, bank transactions, property records, company registrations. Sticky notes and highlighters marked every name, every dollar that didn't make sense. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. I wasn't tired. I was focused. It started with the grants. Mindvest Holdings, Adrian's so-called consulting firm, had received over a dozen federal and private healthcare grants in the past year. Each one was tied to neurological patient rehabilitation programs supposedly run by Clara's therapy center. Only, Clara wasn't a licensed therapist. Not anymore. Her license had quietly expired 2 years ago. I searched for the patients listed in the grants. It took time, but I cross-referenced names, birthdays, even social security numbers. And what I found chilled me. Half of the patients were dead. The other half were elderly, vulnerable, or untraceable. Some were veterans. Some were listed as residents of a long-term care facility that didn't seem to exist anywhere in Massachusetts. These weren't just billing errors. They were ghosts. Clara's therapy center was a front. On paper, it looked legitimate. But there was no receptionist, no client reviews, no invoices that matched actual patient activity. The center's only real function was to filter money through Adrian's company. And from there, it disappeared. Into shell companies in the Cayman Islands, converted to cryptocurrency, moved through accounts with sanitized labels like research consulting fee or therapeutic evaluation. They weren't just scamming patients, they were laundering money. I scrolled through export documents from Mindvest's partner companies and noticed something strange. Frequent transactions between Adrian's firm and a European biotech distributor flagged in a recent government security bulletin. I almost didn't catch it, but the names matched. So did the digital fingerprints. IP addresses, encrypted data packets, shared personnel. They weren't just stealing money, they were stealing medical data. Patient histories, brain scan archives, surgical research. Some of the files had timestamps matching operations I had performed, surgeries I'd written reports on. I opened one and saw my own voice, my dictated post-op notes, copied word for word into a white-labeled PDF file, rebranded with Clara's clinic logo. The rage that burned in me wasn't hot. It was cold, precise, controlled. That night, I sat on my couch, surrounded by open folders and a laptop humming beside me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I started to write everything down. But for a brief moment, I stopped. Was I imagining this? Was I going too far? I stared at the evidence, my mind spinning. After years of long hours in high-pressure surgical rooms, maybe I was seeing patterns that didn't exist. Maybe this was all some sick misunderstanding. I was tired. I was alone. No. I closed my eyes and breathed in, slowly. I wasn't imagining anything. The numbers were real. The signatures were real. The patients, dead or not, were real. And so was the theft. This wasn't about a family estate anymore. It wasn't about hurt feelings or career jealousy. This was a coordinated operation using healthcare systems as a personal ATM. I remembered Adrian at the court hearing, pretending to be concerned, looking sad for the cameras. I remembered Clara's smirk when she said I didn't need the house. I remembered the way my parents looked through me like I was already gone. I stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. Patient records falsified, grant money misused, foreign data transfer flagged, multiple identities compromised. I started the document that would eventually become the foundation of a federal case. They thought they were smart. They had no idea who they were dealing with. It started with a phone call at 3:17 a.m. block number, no voicemail. Just a single ring, long enough to wake me, short enough to make me question whether I imagined it. I stared at the ceiling, my heart already pounding harder than it should have been. The second call came 2 nights later. Same time, same number. This time, I answered. There was a pause on the line. Too long to be an accident. Then a voice, low and deliberate. "Walk away, Dr. Hart. This doesn't concern you anymore." Click. I sat up in bed, the phone still to my ear, heart in my throat. I didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't Adrian. It wasn't anyone I'd ever heard before. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, writing everything I remembered, word choice, accent, tone, and I tried to ignore the fact that I was shaking. 2 days later, a black Lincoln SUV parked across the street from my apartment. It didn't move for hours. The windows were tinted. I couldn't see the driver. It was there when I left for groceries and still there when I came back. The next day, it was gone, but a different car, a dark gray sedan with no front plate, showed up that afternoon and stayed until sunset. I'd seen this kind of thing before back when I worked on neurological case studies tied to military research. This wasn't just intimidation, it was surveillance. Someone was watching me. Everywhere I went, I felt it. The weight behind me, the shadows that lingered just a moment too long. My laptop started running hot. My phone battery died faster than usual. My hospital login was flagged for suspicious access, even though I hadn't logged in for days. They were getting sloppy, or maybe they thought I was. That week, I pulled out the dusty shoebox of old family photos I kept buried in the closet. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to remember what things used to be. Before Clara. Before Adrian started wearing cufflinks to dinner. Before I was the stranger in my own bloodline. There was one photo of us at Lake Winnipesaukee. I must have been 10. Adrian was 7, still clinging to my side, arms wrapped around my waist like I was the only solid thing in his world. I stared at it for a long time. Was he always like this? Or did something break in him along the way? Then I remembered something. Clara had emailed me her therapy center's promotional flyer months ago, back when she was still pretending it was legitimate. I dismissed it at the time, but now I pulled it up. There was a QR code at the bottom. I scanned it. It opened a password-protected folder. Inside, dozens of files. One stood out titled Exfil Protocol. I opened it. Encrypted notes, redacted terms. But 2 words jumped out at me. Extraction authorized. Clearance approved. Suddenly, I wasn't just looking at fraud. I was staring down something international, something dangerous. I wasn't just fighting greedy family members anymore. I was up against something far bigger and far worse. I drove to the house I grew up in on a Thursday afternoon. The same winding driveway I used to bike down, now cracked and overgrown. The front porch still had the faded rocking chairs. The flower beds had gone to weeds. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. My mother opened the door and blinked, surprised. "Celine? I need to talk to both of you," I said. "Now." She stepped aside without a word, and I walked in. My father was in the den, seated in his usual spot, the left side of the leather couch. He muted the TV when he saw me. I pulled out the file from my bag and placed it on the coffee table like a quiet bomb. "This is everything," I said. "Every fraudulent grant, every laundered dollar. Clara's therapy center is a front. Adrian's company is funneling money through fake patients, many of whom are dead. There are offshore accounts, foreign contracts, some of which may involve stolen medical data from this country, from my surgeries." They didn't move. My father reached for his reading glasses. My mother stared at the folder like it had teeth. I watched them flip through the evidence, page after page. Names, dates, account numbers, wire transfers, patient charts with forged signatures. Finally, my mother looked up. "He told us it was just restructuring. We thought it was—" "No," I said, cutting her off. "You chose to believe him because he stayed close, because he smiled and called you every Sunday, because he needed you to think I was the problem." My father set the papers down, slow and deliberate. "You don't understand the pressure he's under. Adrian had to step in because you—" "Because I what?" I snapped. "Because I left to build a life? Because I didn't stay here to be your backup plan?" "You walked away," he said flatly. "You chose your career." "I chose to save lives," I replied, voice low. Well, he chose fraud. My mother was already crying, the kind of soft, practiced tears that had once convinced me to forgive things I shouldn't have. "We just didn't want to lose both of you," she whispered. "Adrian was trying to protect what's ours. What's yours too?" "No," I said. "He was protecting himself, and you let him." My father folded his arms. "This will ruin us. Everything we've built." "Good," I said. "Because what you built is rotten." I turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" my mother called after me. I didn't look back. "To burn this thing down before it poisons anyone else." And just before I closed the door behind me, I said, "Family isn't blood, it's choice." Then I stepped into the cold air and walked away. I am done choosing you. The next day, I made 5 calls, short, direct, to people who owed me nothing but remembered. I had helped them once during hospital crises, public health emergencies, and quiet scandals we never spoke of again. Now it was my turn. We met at an abandoned rural clinic in western Massachusetts, one that used to serve low-income patients before the funding dried up. It sat quiet now, cracked linoleum floors, peeling paint, no power, but it was isolated. and more importantly, secure. First to arrive was Margot Wynne, an investigative journalist who used to work for a major newspaper before she burned too many bridges chasing medical corruption stories. Then came Reggie, a cybersecurity expert I once called in during a ransomware attack at the hospital. Then Dr. Yusuf, a soft-spoken physician who had testified in a federal case against an insurance fraud ring. Last was Eli. He used to be an analyst for the Department of Health and Human Services. I had vouched for him when he lost everything blowing the whistle on forged Medicare data. He never forgot. They greeted me without fanfare. No hugs, just nods and laptops opening. Flash drives, battery packs, folded sleeves. Clara's clinic is the doorway, I said, pointing to a series of documents spread across a table. But Adrian's company is the hallway, and that hallway leads to something international. Reggie whistled low. You weren't kidding. They got to work. We pored over spreadsheets and metadata, decrypted internal documents from Mindvest Holdings, mapped connections to dummy companies in Zurich and Singapore. Margot traced the wire transfers, and Eli flagged the identical language used in multiple funding proposals, a classic sign of ghostwriting or AI laundering. By dusk, we had what we needed. Adrian and Clara weren't just siphoning money. They were selling access. Research logs, surgical data, neurological models, everything from my hard drives to hospital cloud archives, had been copied, rebranded, and transferred to a shell company linked to a biotech research firm with known foreign intelligence ties. Here, Margot said, sliding over a USB drive. It's all compiled, labeled, chronologically indexed. You walk this into a federal courtroom and it'll collapse everything they've built. I held the drive between my fingers. It was barely the size of my thumb. This is what I needed, I said quietly. Yusuf looked at me. Celine, are you okay? I wanted to lie, say yes, that I was relieved, triumphant, but all I felt was hollow. I think I've been losing my family for longer than I realized, I said. Maybe this just made it official. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Before we left, Eli handed me one last thing, another drive, separate from the legal one. This copy's encrypted and stored on the cloud in case anything happens. I nodded. I didn't ask what he meant. We all knew. When I got back to my apartment, I sat alone for a long time, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not for what I was about to do, but for everything I had already lost. Courtroom 3B was packed, not just with lawyers and journalists, but with spectators, family friends, and colleagues who had once clutched my elbow in hospital hallways or whispered pleasantries at galas. Now they came to watch the fall of Dr. Celine Hart. Some looked sympathetic, most just looked curious. Adrian and Clara sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in muted gray, like grief counselors. Clara wore a pearl necklace and no expression. Adrian leaned close to his attorney, murmuring confidently, one hand smoothing back his hair in slow, deliberate strokes. My parents were seated in the second row behind them. My mother avoided my eyes. My father didn't bother. Across from them, I sat with my attorney, Michael Leone, a former federal prosecutor with a voice like gravel and no patience for theatrics. They're leaning hard on instability, he muttered as the judge entered. Get ready. And they did. Adrian's team opened with a monologue about duty, family, and concern. They showed emails from me declining holidays, a photo of me passed out in an OR lounge after a 40-hour shift, a psychologist's affidavit suggesting my extreme professional isolation had caused empathy fatigue. They painted me as brilliant, yes, but also unbalanced, emotionally frigid, dangerous with power. She used her authority to manipulate the family trust, Clara's attorney said smoothly. She exploited our parents' faith and took over everything, quietly, secretly. Then, when questioned, she lashed out. They called my parents to the stand. My mother's voice trembled, just enough to sway. She changed after her residency, she said, folding her hands in her lap. She stopped returning calls. She started speaking to us like we were beneath her. My father spoke in colder terms. She may be a surgeon, but she doesn't understand family. That's why Adrian took charge. They had an answer for everything, except what was coming. When the judge finally turned to our side, Michael stood and said simply, Your Honor, we'd like to submit a supplemental document. The clerk took the flash drive. The courtroom fell quiet. The judge clicked through the digital evidence, her eyes narrowing as she read. The room seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Emails, financial records, grant applications signed with Clara's forged license, patient files, dozens, listing surgeries that never happened, shell companies with overlapping IP addresses, international wire transfers to biotech firms with redacted federal flags. Then came the keyword search report compiled by Eli. Words like exfiltration, off-book, neural map replication, clearance level. The judge stopped. She looked up at Adrian, who had turned pale. Clara had stopped blinking. "Mr. Hart," the judge said slowly, "would you like to respond to the evidence suggesting your company submitted fraudulent claims and exported protected patient data to foreign entities?" Adrian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "Clara Hart?" the judge asked. "You're listed as the medical supervisor for all false claims. You'll want counsel." Her attorney whispered frantically. "Clerk," the judge snapped, "seal the courtroom. Notify federal authorities. I am issuing an immediate suspension of all proceedings pending investigation. Mr. Leone, remain available. Everyone else, sit tight." Two U.S. Marshals entered through the rear doors like ghosts summoned from nowhere. They walked straight to Adrian and Clara. "Stand, please." Handcuffs clicked. Gasps rippled through the gallery. My mother stood. "Wait, this can't be happening." My father didn't speak. He just lowered his head. Clara twisted in her seat. "Celine, you did this?" "No," I said softly. "You did." As they were led away, Adrian turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I just watched him go. The courtroom was still sealed, but for the first time in months, I felt free. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just clear, like I could finally breathe again. The news broke the same night. By morning, it was everywhere. Renowned neurosurgeon exposes family fraud ring tied to foreign data leaks. Arrests made in shocking Hart family scandal, courtroom sealed, federal agents called in. Clara and Adrian Hart, from power couple to criminal defendants. They didn't use my name in the headlines at first, just Dr. Hart. A neutral term, a placeholder. Some called me a whistleblower. Others called me estranged, troubled, controversial. By noon, reporters camped outside my building. I saw their vans lined up along the curb as I sipped cold tea by the window, watching a camera crew fumble with cables in the rain. They wanted a soundbite, a statement, a photo of me looking vindicated or tearful or anything they could run with. They got nothing. I didn't answer the door. I didn't respond to messages. I shut off every alert, every ping, every meaningless apology email from colleagues who had distanced themselves months ago. Inside the apartment, the quiet was thick, peaceful, but complicated. The federal agents hadn't arrested my parents. Due to their age, they were classified as non-cooperative witnesses, not co-conspirators. That alone sparked a debate online. Some thought it was justice. Others thought I had gone too far. There were threads on Reddit debating whether I had weaponized my intelligence to destroy my family. Think pieces on surgeon burnout, op-eds on elder loyalty, betrayal, female ambition. 1,000 strangers weighed in on a life they didn't live. Some praised me, some called me a monster. I read none of it. Instead, I spent my days slowly cleaning my apartment. I boxed up old textbooks, cleared out the fridge, rearranged the furniture in the guest bedroom. Every mundane task felt like proof I was still here, still real, when everything else had turned abstract. The hospital sent a formal letter. Administrative leave lifted, full privileges restored. I folded it and slid it into a drawer. I wasn't ready to go back yet. Not because I was scared, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to return to a place that had hesitated to stand by me. One evening, I sat on the balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the streetlights flicker on. The air smelled like smoke and wet concrete. I thought about Adrian. And for the first time, I didn't feel hatred. I just felt tired. He hadn't started out this way. We'd shared a bedroom once, fought over board games, whispered secrets under the covers. He had been a boy who followed me like a shadow. But the weight of being the golden son, the loyal child, the one who stayed, it changed him, and maybe, just maybe, I had left too much behind too fast. That didn't excuse him, but it explained something. And that was enough. I didn't need to defend myself to the world. I had already done the one thing that mattered. I told the truth. 3 months later, I stood on a stage in a small auditorium in Providence, Rhode Island. Nothing flashy, just a rented hall inside a community college filled with plastic chairs and folding tables, no cameras, no reporters, just people, former patients, nurses, small-town physicians, paralegals, parents of kids who had been overbilled, families who had lost everything to medical debt. They weren't polished, they weren't curated, but they were here. I cleared my throat, the mic crackling as I adjusted it. "Thank you for being here," I said. This isn't a press event. This isn't about me. This is about what we've all seen and what we're going to do next. The banner behind me read, "The Heart Foundation for Patient Protection and Medical Transparency." What started as an idea during a sleepless night had become a real, living thing, a foundation that offered free legal aid to patients and whistleblowers. Cybersecurity audits for small clinics, advocacy for legislation protecting vulnerable populations from health system exploitation. We weren't huge, not yet, but we had enough to get moving. Reggie handled digital security. Margot ran our outreach programs. Eli helped draft the policy proposals. I stayed off camera mostly, but I reviewed every application that came in. Every letter, every voice message left in shaky tones. People needed this. People like Miss Alvarez, who came up to me after the event, holding an envelope. She was short, gray-haired, with sun-damaged skin and eyes that held stories. She didn't speak much English, but her daughter translated as she pressed the envelope into my hand. "She says thank you," the daughter said. "Your foundation helped get her debt canceled. The treatments were never real, just paperwork. We didn't know how to fight it." I opened the envelope in the parking lot. Inside was a handwritten note in Spanish. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't dramatic. It simply said, "Thank you for standing up when no one else did." I sat in my car for 10 minutes and cried. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I finally felt useful again. Not as a surgeon, not as a sister, as a person. 2 weeks later, I drove to the coast, just past Newburyport, where the sand stretches in long gray sheets and the wind never stops moving. I stood by the water in a wool coat and sneakers, watching the tide roll in and out. I didn't think about the courtroom. I didn't think about Adrian. I thought about the lives I could still touch, the damage I might still prevent, the purpose that had risen from the wreckage like something reborn. At my feet, the ocean whispered against the rocks. I closed my eyes and let it. Then I turned away, hands in my coat pockets, and walked back toward the road, toward the work that waited, toward the future I'd chosen for myself. And I carried it all with me: grief, betrayal, redemption. Not like a weight anymore, but like a compass, and I didn't look back.